This video is going to talk about the Kundalini energy and how it can be in the body as it activates and rises and does a lot of clearing and healing. I'll tell my story and just explain a little bit about what has happened to me so far with it. And if you're somebody who thinks they're going through a Kundalini rising or Kundalini activation, some of the things to do to hang in there. Kundalini is a word that we get from the Eastern traditions that's referring to the energy of God that is in the body that can activate at, the right time, even if it feels like it's not quite the right time, and can bring a lot of changes and metamorphoses in a human being. In the East, people who practice a lot of yoga and meditation, often they aim, through their practice to awaken this Kundalini energy and prepare their body with different practices in order for a more of a seamless, smooth experience when it does rise. It's an energy that all humans have in the base of their spine, but it's dormant, it's latent until it gets activated. And it can get activated through this practice of yoga and meditation and other similar things that they do. But in the West nowadays, a lot of people are experiencing Kundalini activations and rising spontaneously, often through trauma. And so there are way, way more people that are going through this experience of this energy getting unlocked and rising and causing often havoc in the body, havoc in the emotional and spiritual life while this whole transformation takes place. So it's going to look very different from person to person, because even though we do all share this life force energy, when it gets activated and rises in the body, it's going to hit different emotional blocks. It's going to hit different injuries, physical injuries from the past, and kind of reactivate them temporarily. And so what it looked like for me would be very different than what it would look like for you, because I've got, different memories and a different history, but it's the same energy. And so for me, it actually started, it wasn't one traumatic experience. It was a couple of years before the car accident where I had my out-of-body experience in 2017. I started waking up in the middle of the night, and my body was really, really hot. My skin was really hot. And it wasn't just in my head, like my partner, has to touch my arm, he'd be like, it feels like you're on fire. How can you handle that? And I went and I got some hormone tests at the doctor. I went to the naturopath for some more advanced saliva tests, and everyone said there's nothing wrong with you. You're not in early menopause. You're not getting hot flashes. We can find nothing. And so for months and months, I would wake up in the middle of the night with this intense heat in my body, and it was really disruptive on my sleep. And also what was happening is my legs would start to get itchy when I'd wake up too. Even though there was no mosquito bites, there was no rashes, there was no allergic reactions, my legs would be so itchy. And then after a few minutes, my torso and my back would get itchy up until my shoulders. And even, the next morning I would look and there was really no rash. There was nothing to explain this itch, this moving itch. And then in 2017, after my car accident, in the months that followed, it seemed like more stuff started to happen. This stuff continued and sometimes, and actually started to be even more often. And other stuff started to happen too. So the car accident, I think, just kind of accelerated this Kundalini rising for me. Some of the things that I experienced between then and now have been being incapacitated, just suddenly and out of the blue, super fatigued, as though a heavy weighted blanket was put on top of me and I just needed to lie down, and sometimes spending, days and days in bed. A hyper awareness of all damaged body parts from the past, places where my tonsils used to be. I would struggle with that. The place where I injured my shoulder in the car accident that was fully healed. Sometimes when the energy would rise and hit that body part, I would feel it all over again, even though I hadn't done anything weird with my body. Bloating, nausea, burping up blood sometimes, weight loss, heartburn, extreme constipation, dizziness, waves of heat, sinus infections, tooth pain. Sometimes when the energy would rise, I would get pressure on my back teeth. Go to the dentist. They said nothing's unusual, nothing's wrong. What else? Yeah, those were the major ones. And so it always went like I would start to feel that movement of energy at the base of my spine or in the bottom near my pelvis. It would start to move up slowly. And as it did, it would cause some of these things to go down. And it's been pretty ongoing for about 6 years now. And what happens at the same time as the body starts to experience a couple of these symptoms is old hurts, old memories, things I'd completely forgotten about from my childhood, from my teenage years. The memories of those things would come back really vividly so that I could kind of see what happened, take any lessons I needed to learn from them, and forgive what needed to be forgiven, whether it's forgiving myself or forgiving somebody else, and let it go and let it dissolve and release anything that needed to be released, like some tears, this kind of thing. So it's not just a physical thing, it's like a transformation of any emotional and spiritual blockages that are in all these body parts. And so I couldn't believe that I had, even to this day, I couldn't believe that there's so much that can get stored in the body as far as memory. But the truth is, as we go through life and we're just working or in survival mode, or just like running from A to B, stuff happens. Stuff happens and we don't have time to process them and understand them and have the emotions that go along with them sometimes, especially when we're kids or teenagers. We're not always understood or supported when hard things happen, and we just got to get up and keep going. But during a Kundalini rising, the intelligence of the universe and the divinity of all that is, of God, allows us to have these moments or these afternoons where we can experience really difficult feelings in the body as the energy moves around, as well as understand and process emotionally and spiritually what needs to be processed. A Kundalini activation is not going to happen to somebody by accident, even if it seems unexpected or even unwanted. It's when the spiritual bodies that kind of surround our physical body are at a point where they're ready to handle the energy of the Kundalini rising in the container, that you've got the internal support of the work that you've done so far to face and feel all this stuff that comes along. Like I said, in the West here, most of us don't have a really regular yoga meditation practice for years, or guides that are helping prepare our bodies for these things. So we often have these things happen kind of suddenly, and we can experience more a chaotic version of a Kundalini rising than those who train their bodies and their spirits for years in the East. Now, some people, when this happens, the energy will shoot up their body through various channels and immediately hit their third eye and their crown chakra. And if this happens, they can go into really high states of ecstasy and bliss. They can see visions. They can experience oneness, all kinds of really euphoric things. And if that happens to someone, that's really amazing. It's not always a long-term state of being. Usually there's a come down. I know that after my car accident, there was a couple of years where I was kind of in this zone, to be honest. I wasn't experiencing the energy blockages and pain associated with the rising. I was getting like a higher connection to nature than I'd ever had, and I found a lot of synchronicities happening. I would just seem to automatically meet with so many like-minded individuals and have this experience of really high-level celestial dreams and all these kinds of things. And I just thought, wow, Kundalini rising is amazing. This needs to happen to everybody. Like, how could we do this? And I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't realize that this temporary level of bliss and euphoria can come, followed by a real come down, where the real work starts, where we start to move through these blockages physically and emotionally. So yeah, that bliss period doesn't have to happen to everyone, but if it does happen, it's going to be followed by a lot of work for sure. And so this energy is sometimes described as a fire of transmutation in some traditions. In Western esoteric traditions, it's called the fire of transformation, the fire of transmutation. And it's when this rising energy tries to purify the parts of us that haven't been purified yet, haven't been looked at yet. And it can call into question a lot of parts of us that, maybe we experienced as a young person and we just kind of moved on from and forgot and didn't realize that that part of us is still somehow alive and well in the shadow, alive and well in the subconscious. So something that happened for me was when I was a teenager, I was definitely a bit of an oddball as far as, fitting in with the in crowd and being popular, and I just was none of that. I was kind of shy and introverted and pretty self-conscious. And so although I hadn't kind of felt like that version of me since I was in high school, I would start to experience that part of me when I was in social situations suddenly, often with people that I'd known for a long time or people who I was at work with. And so it was really troubling. All of the ways that I worried about how I looked, or just all kinds of teenage stuff, I started to re-experience, and I kept thinking like, oh, can anyone tell? Like, I feel like I'm 13 in a late 30s-year-old body. And so these parts of us that struggled and couldn't really find any answers, and we thought that we grew out of, they can potentially be activated during a Kundalini activation, so that we're clearing them out for good. We're kind of like burning off what's not able to move on with us into our future. Some people refer to this as the eye of a needle. It's like the squeeze where we're literally moving through such a tight space where anything that's not important is not going to get through. And as it gets shedded off, it's a painful process because we're kind of used to it around us being a kind of hidden part of us, and now it's got to go. It's like, oh, part of me is getting ripped off, and a part of me that I forgot that I even had. Yeah, and the alchemists talk about this process of turning lead into gold, which perhaps they were doing in a laboratory back then. But really, one thing they were doing when they wrote about turning lead into gold was code. It was code for turning the old body, the dull emotional and spiritual being, the sleepwalking version of us, allowing this transformation, this alchemical transformation to happen through these changes inside the body, and eventually create gold, a golden person, a person with purified intentions, purified ways of behaving, purified ways of moving through the world in cohesion and collaboration with nature and other healthy and well people around them, without the stuff that holds us back from those things regularly. And a major piece of what gets hit during this process is the sneaky ways that our egos run the show. And it can be so varied from person to person. Some people's ego likes to show up as being really loud, the center of attention, name dropping, really concerned about like status and reputation. Other people's egos show up in more of a victim-like way, where it's like there's often a blame of other people for them being inadequate or small. There's a not taking of risks, not stepping into the unknown, just staying small and hidden and really never getting out there. There's so many sneaky ways that our ego tries to just kind of like keep us in the same place over and over. And this fire that comes along will call into question all of these patterns that we didn't even realize that we were doing, ways that the ego is trying to keep us in one place. And the way that it does that is makes us very aware and ashamed of, maybe, or embarrassed, as we start to see those parts of us in a spotlight, and causes us to maybe at first be a little humiliated or repulsed by what we're seeing suddenly about how we're showing up, but not to condemn us, and not so that we suffer, but in order for us to switch into showing up a little bit differently. So if we're that loud, overbearing person, we're going to switch into listening more often. If we're that small person that's never putting themselves out there and thinking so little of themselves, then we're going to start taking more risks and bringing more of ourselves forward. So it's kind of bringing this balance to the ego. It's not trying to destroy the ego, but it's trying to bring it into a more balanced version of itself. And again, for most of us who haven't prepared our bodies with spiritual practices to experience something like this, there's going to be many rounds of this, many waves of it coming through. And as it does, we're going to notice different things. We're going to learn different things. Many of our responses can be, a fluctuating confidence, because now we no longer have that fallback to our ego. The ego has been, kind of like dismantled and challenged. So there can be a fluctuating confidence. Like, what am I confident in if I don't have my beauty, my status, my big bank account, my 20-year plan? Like, when all that kind of stuff gets shaken up, it's like, okay, who am I and what remains? What can I stand on? So there can be like a bit of a shaky confidence, because those are this world's values. And if we don't have those things anymore for some reason, or we don't feel very good about them, they're kind of like shaky ground, we're going to have to go through that fluctuating confidence to find the gold that we can rely on. We can hit breakdown, mental health symptoms where we really don't know what's going on. Everything feels very confusing. Nothing feels like it ever has before. It's easier just to stay in bed. Maybe there's like panic attacks or paranoia, and the nervous system is getting activated, because our nervous system is very much affected by the fire of transformation. It's very affected by Kundalini activation. It feels it. And as we move through this, we can end up with a really sensitive nervous system, because this nervous system is getting waves and waves of this energetic heat. It's getting activated in ways that it never has. The nervous system itself is in its own purification and transformational journey as it moves along. So as a result of all this stuff that can be happening, and again, I'm only speaking from my own experience. I would love to hear, if you're watching this and you have some stories about your own experience, please share, so that we can learn from each other and see what else people are going through. What I noticed anyways, as far as changes in the outward world, as my perceptions and my priorities started to like radically move around, was the collapse of a lot of old relationships where there was like a victim predator dance, or relationships where someone felt sorry for someone else, and so they were not showing up out of love, whether it's me showing up for someone else or someone showing up for me, and it wasn't really out of like loving kindness and support. It was like, oh, I need to fix this person. I need to feel sorry for this person. I pity this person. They can't, they don't have it together, so I've got to save them, like this savior complex. That starts to fall apart. You start to realize how you're showing up in certain relationships that's not life-giving to the other person, or not life-giving to yourself. And if that other person only is comfortable with the old version of you, but that old version is getting collapsed and no longer exists. It's getting dissolved in this fire. Maybe that person really doesn't want to be around you anymore. Or maybe you don't want to be around that other person because what connected you with them was something very unhealthy, but you don't have that unhealthy thing. And now suddenly you don't feel drawn to each other. So collapsing of old relationships is really normal. And it doesn't mean someone's done something wrong. It just means that everything that we needed to learn from that relationship with that other person is complete. If it wasn't complete, we'd still be there experiencing and learning. So it's okay. A loss of interest in old activities. So if we had activities that really only served our ego and propped up our ego to be somehow important by doing those activities, we're going to really lose interest in that because our egos are starting to get a balance, starting to get a cleansing. And so the need and the draw to be involved in certain things can naturally fall away, and it won't necessarily make sense. Like, why am I not interested in that activity anymore? We can get a real distaste for inauthenticity, whether it's inauthenticity in ourself, inauthenticity in, group situations. Like some people start to be bothered by small talk for too long because it's like, okay, yeah, everyone knows that there's so much more going on than small talk, but they're just sticking with the small talk, and it's just kind of like not interesting, that kind of thing can happen. We start to desire some extra silence, maybe time in isolation, maybe time on retreat, where we can hear our inner voice more and we can feel and sense into what we want in our life instead of some of these things that we no longer want. What do we want things to look like? And silence and time alone is required in order to really get clear on those priorities without the voices of other people. And if you're around a lot of other people that don't really want you to change, or they're not like really thrilled about you changing your priorities, their voices can feel kind of like they're in the way of that inner voice. And you might need to temporarily take some time out. And this doesn't need to be rude to anybody else. I remember a couple of times letting some of my closer relationships know, like, hey, like I'm taking some time out. I might not get back to you on text or email right away. It's nothing personal. I just really got to spend some time with myself. It's just what I feel I need. You don't have to apologize to anyone. You just need to do it. And during that time out, so many things can be shown to you. It's such special time if you can do that during these awakening times. You can start to even notice in retrospect red flags in relationships that are collapsing that you ignored long ago, that probably could have told you that it wasn't the right fit for each other, but for whatever reason we didn't listen. One thing that I noticed a lot ongoingly was if relationships collapsed, as I changed my priorities and was a little bit more true to the red flags that I was seeing, I started to admit to myself that I was being in connection with certain people because I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to be needed. I wanted to be the hero. I wanted to have this savior complex. And if I didn't have that type of relationship, then maybe I would have no value or no meaning. Maybe I'd be alone, like do I know how to like make friends where that doesn't exist, these kinds of things. So starting to see that my motivations have not always actually been out of love and benevolence. They've been in, how is this serving me? How can I keep it in my life so that it continues to serve me? How can I manipulate this situation in order to have needs met when really, like, we can meet our own needs. We really can once we get on our healing path. We don't need other people to do that. And then our relationships in the future are more collaborative, and they're more balanced. We're not using people for things. People are not using us for things. And then, seeing what needs to be relocated, like in those quiet times where we're stepping out of the busyness of life, we're taking a break from technology, these kind of things. what needs to get relocated? Does my body need to get relocated? Do I need to move? Do I need to step away from certain ongoing commitments that are really not in line with who I'm becoming? What needs to get relocated in my focus? Like, is social media even really that important to me anymore? Like, am I spending too much time watching negative content on TV or on YouTube? Like, how is that serving me? How is that feeding my soul? All these questions we can start to ask ourselves without the influence of other people and being bombarded with technology when we take these times out. And so just kind of something that just popped in my head was to share an example about how this rising energy can hit a part of your body and you're dealing with like physical pain or blockages and also emotional connections. One of the first things that got hit with this energy was my bladder. I'll never forget, it wasn't a one-time event. It kind of started to creep in where the energy would activate. I'd feel kind of like what felt like a little ant running around in my, kind of like my lower pelvis. And then soon after that, I'd have to pee. And I'd run to the toilet. And then in the next couple hours, I'd be back at the toilet like 6 or 7 times. And I would get tested for bladder infections, and I had none. Sometimes I would feel almost just like a pressure or a squeezing on my bladder. Weird things would happen with my bladder. And I came to understand much later, it took me a while, that the bladder is connected to the root chakra, which is connected to safety, security, and survival. And in my early life, I was quite terrified. I was quite ungrounded. I feel very unsecure. And I had bedwetting stuff going on. And this was as a result of not feeling very safe, with feeling supported as a young person, as well as when I would see interdimensional beings that I didn't understand, sometimes in the middle of the night. And all of this made me feel, in general, very unsafe as a little person. And, we grow up. We don't have, for me, I didn't have those early childhood bladder problems as I grew up. They went away. But the energetic charge can go silent. It can go sleeping. It can hide in the subconscious. And then when this fire of the Kundalini starts to rise, it's going to go looking for stuff like that we've kind of like quickly turned our head away from, grown up, passed off, never wanted to look at again, maybe forgot about. And so I remember, for the couple of years that followed my car accident, just this waking up, up to 10 times in the night to use the toilet, and just being exhausted the next day, and knowing that this was the energy hitting my root chakra, and this is how it showed up. So it doesn't always have to be like a movement or a twitching on the spine, although that's pretty common. It can be some issues with the organs that are around that part of the body that the energy is hitting as it rises. And if it's not like a classic, I should say classic because there's no actual classic, but a typical Kundalini rising experience where you feel energy at the base of your spine, it's moving up your spine, you're feeling heat or twitching or energy, and it moves all the way up. That's like a typical way people experience it. But nowadays, with so many people on a spiritual awakening and getting this kind of inner purification and inner cleansing, some people call it like Ascension Flu. It can show up in so many different ways. You might not notice a lot around your spine. You might be just noticing energy moving around in your body, it causing pain or discomfort or some sort of like chronic problem. And then if you pay close attention and really ask your inner guide, like, okay, is this something that's associated with an old trauma, an old memory, an unhealed emotional block? Is this something that I can learn from? What is this? Like, what's this associated with? I'm in the interest of allowing this to dissolve and clear. I'm in the interest of working with this rising energy of fire in order to heal whatever this is. Because sometimes it's not always obvious. We can have a physical thing going down when the energy hits, but we can't really remember what the memory what the healing needs to be. So that's sometimes when praying and meditating and asking the inner guide for advice comes in order for us to really work with that and get it clear. And so, there are general recommendations like drinking a lot of water, maybe taking supplements like magnesium or vitamin D or any herbs that help the nervous system. Like, those are some things that can help. Really being gentle with yourself if you're going through something like this. It can be a long time, or it can be many, many waves of this. And just really seeing how you can adjust your lifestyle in order to slow things down and create more space in any possible way. And sometimes the waves of discomfort, pain, and pressure of this can be very overwhelming. There's times where I would call in sick to work just because I needed to be present and surrendering in my body, feeling what needed to be felt. And sometimes these kind of intense things would be very detoxing and uncomfortable and go on for days in a row. And I just want to say to that, if someone is passing through kind of like a deep dive of a group of days of this process moving through, that the deeper we go, the deeper we can surrender, the more relaxed we can make ourselves in these very uncomfortable waves. To the degree that we can do that, the greater transformation and clarity and crispness that can be on the other side waiting for us. Because again, even when it's really uncomfortable, we have to remember that this is not here to hurt us. This is here to clear out what is not ideal for us to take forward with us in our life's journey. So if you can surrender and breathe through these things and really try to stay heart-centered and self-compassionate and relax to the greatest degree that you can relax, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and allowing yourself to go, because it's only temporary, to go as deep as possible into the experience and allow that fire to go. To that degree, you're going to get like the bounty, the fruit of what's for you on the other side, the greatest possible purging and clearing that you can get, and potentially gifts, potentially special gifts. Yeah. If you're interested in more of a scientific, biological explanation to the Kundalini activation, Kundalini energy in the body, I'll link Jana Dixon's website in the description. She has written extensively and researched extensively about this, but brings a lot of science with it. She had a very, very chaotic Kundalini activation years ago and has a great website. And she writes on the down wave that I was just talking about. She says, hang out in bed, relax into the down cycle, become comfortable, avoid stimulants, avoid fleeing, take many baths, showers, and drink a lot of water. And if possible, don't suppress what's going on with pharmaceuticals. There's an extreme chemistry change happening in the body. So suppressing that with pharmaceuticals is just delaying the toxin breakdown, because there's a physical detox, there's a physical toxin breaking down going on. And yeah, definitely check out her website if this is something you're going through, or if it's something that you want to find out more about from the scientific side of things. And so, keep hang in there if you're someone who's experiencing these symptoms during your spiritual awakening. And I would love to hear other people's experiences and stories about what they have experienced in it, to help us all learn from each other in the comments. So please don't hesitate to comment, this video if you appreciated it. And I think that's all.